Hey guys, I wanted to come on here and talk about this article, which is very interesting. Consider you have a lot of Black people who talk about issues in societies, reporting that we've had so much progress. This is a different time than it was during Jim Crow. This is 2018. The white people of today are not responsible for the disenfranchisement that we face as they weren't there around slavery. People keep pushing and telling Black people to vote, although Black people have been voting. Yet you have multiple reports, recent reports stating that there has been no progress for Black people on home ownership, unemployment, and incarceration in the past 50 years. So it's really interesting that you have Black people coming out here with these narratives and suggesting that we're in our situation that we're in systemic white supremacy because Black people are not voting, or because Black people are not pulling themselves up from the bootstraps. Black people are lazy, et cetera, et cetera. All of the excuses that a lot of people in our community, both men and women, make in order to not address the real issue, which is systemic white supremacy. It is ludicrous to assert that we can vote our way out of a system of white supremacy that we did not vote to be in. So this is the flawed logic of Black people, and this is why in the last video that I posted to my YouTube station, we discussed whether or not Black people were intelligent, because you have a number of Black people who have been making videos suggesting that white people collectively are smarter than Black people. And initially I didn't agree, but now I am inclined to agree. And not smarter based on any genetic foundation, but smarter based on the fact that they don't allow Black people's inputs or Black people's opinions or whatever Black people want to deter them from achieving what they want to achieve and maintaining global dominance, whereas Black people allow white people's comforts and feelings and attitudes to determine whether not only their emotional states, how they react to savagery, whether or not they love themselves, whether or not they love their communities. So despite the history and the current interaction that Black people have with white people, Black people still haven't been smart enough to unite or learn from other people in society and learn that unity with your group is the best way to overcome any systemic oppression. And those are just some of the reasons why they're smarter. But I think if you really sit around and look at it, no matter which way Black people pitch it, whether you say they're dumber, they're eviler, they're more clever, whatever you want to call it, bottom line of it is despite you knowing that, you're not making the necessary changes to provoke the necessary changes to that are conducive to progress, and you're still allowing yourself to be deceived by these people that you know are deceiving you, that you know are clever, that you know are savage. You're still allowing them to do all these things to you with the knowledge that they are actually doing it. So the reality of it is this is just an issue with Black people and their lack of intelligence and thinking, that tried and failed methods are beneficial when, again, they've been tried and they've been failed. Black people have been voting on both local and presidential level, and yet nothing has changed for us in the entire past 50 years. So let's get into the article. It says, why does it start saying convened? Anyway, it says, convened to examine the cause of civil unrest in Black communities, the Presidential Commission issued a 1968 report with a stark conclusion: America was moving forward two societies, one Black, one white, separate and equal. 5 years after the historic Kerner Commission identified white racism as the key cause of pervasive discrimination in employment, education, and housing, keep in mind these so-called Black people who are supposed to be smart adamantly deny these things despite all the data that says it, and they continue to coon and go against their own best interests, but we're smart. There has been no progress in how African Americans fare in comparison to whites when it comes to home ownership, unemployment, and incarceration, according to a report released Monday by the Economic Policy Institute. In some cases, African Americans are worse off today than they were before civil rights movement culminated in laws barring housing and voter discrimination, as well as racial segregation. And the reality of it is that's because during the civil rights movement, Black people weren't really seeking liberation from racism and systemic oppression. They were seeking access to white people. And though they're two completely different things, you get what you fight for. So when you fight to be in proximity to white people and have sexual access to white people, that's not going to get rid of these systemic oppressive forces that are holding you back. So it says 7.5% of African Americans were unemployed in 2017, compared with 6.7% in 1968, still roughly twice the white unemployment rate. And that's because still during those times, during the segregation, a lot of Black people had jobs because they had their own businesses. Now that you've decided to integrate, now you don't have your own businesses, which automatically is going to drop the employment rate of Black people. Again, back, it says the rate of home ownership, one of the most important ways for working and middle class families to build wealth. You guys need to look at that part right there. The rate of home ownership, one of the most important ways for working and middle class families to build wealth, has remained virtually unchanged for African Americans in the past 50 years. Black home ownership remains just over 40%, trailing 30 points behind the rate for whites, who have seen modest gains during that time. And then it says the share of incarcerated African Americans has nearly tripled between 1968 and 2016, one of the largest and most depressing developments in the past 50 years, especially for Black men, researchers said. African Americans are 6.4 times as likely as whites to be jailed or imprisoned, compared with 5.4 times as likely in 1968. And the interesting thing of it is African Americans are 6.4 times more likely than white people, despite the fact that white people actually commit the most crimes. Again, so people can say, oh, we don't live in a society of mostly beta males, and Black men have been doing what they're supposed to be doing, and they have been fighting systemic oppression, which they've never really done. But the data just isn't backing that. The data is saying what I've been saying, and that's that we have a group of people who are complacent and comfortable being in a system of white supremacy. Again, I'll say Black men have never fought to end systemic white supremacy. Asking to be integrated is not fighting systemic white supremacy. So no, there isn't a period in time when Black men have fought to dismantle the system of white supremacy, not one. The civil rights movement was not about ending systemic racism and white supremacy. It was geared towards giving Black people access to being in the same social spaces and sharing voluntarily engaging in sexual practices, marriage, and dating with white people. That's what the civil rights movement was about, and that's why you see nothing has changed in terms of systemic oppression. And if Black men are out there fighting so hard and have been doing whatever it takes to get rid of systemic racism and white supremacy, and the reason I say men is because other groups of men already have the understanding that the men are biologically placed in a position to protect their communities. That is just the reality of what it is. Black men are the only group of men who really believe that it is everybody in their communities' job to fight off of invaders in their communities and oppressive forces. Black men are the only men who believe that. So that means the flaw is within their mindset, because it is your responsibility as a group of men to stop them from mass incarcerating you. And even if you didn't want to protect Black women, why are you not getting yourself out of this oppression? Why are you still letting them dominate you? That's the thing. Forget about protecting Black women from being dominated. Why aren't you as a Black man protecting yourself from being dominated? That's just the reality. Because really, if you were protecting yourself from being dominated, that would set the precedence that you're not going to automatically, that would protect Black women from being dominated. So the question of it is, if Black men want to say, oh, they can't protect Black women, okay, that's fine. You can't protect Black women and children. Why aren't you protecting yourself? Why aren't you getting yourself out of systemic racism? That's why you will have a lot of them being delusional and saying that it simply doesn't exist, because then if they admit that it exists, they have to admit that they're submitting to it if they're dominated by it, and that's what they're not going to do. But let's go back to the article. It says, we have not seen progress because we still have not addressed the issue of racial inequality in this country. No, we have not had progress because Black people are not seeking racial equality. That's why we haven't. And until Black people admit that we can't have progress because they're not looking for racial equality, they are looking for white acceptance, we can't really get what we're actually looking for, because they're not going to admit it. You are not looking for racial equality. You're not. You're looking for niceties and white approval and acceptance, and those are two completely different things. They do not intersect. That's just a reality. But back to the article. It said, in this country, said John Schmidt, an economist and vice president of the Economic Policy Institute, citing the racial wealth gap and continuing racial discrimination in the labor and housing markets. One of the key issues is the disadvantages so many African Americans face right from the very beginning as children. And yet, who's doing anything about this? That's the question. The wealth gap between white and Black Americans has more than tripled in the past 50 years. And I'm going to tell you who have interracial daters have helped for the the wealth gap to triple. And I'm going to tell you why. Tiger Woods helped it by being with white women and funneling money into their community. Basketball players have done that by being married to white people in the community. Taye Diggs has done it by funneling money. Any Black man who has a child with a white woman has contributed to this tripling of money, wealth going into the white community. Because every time you have to pay them out millions in child support, every time you have to pay them out a divorce settlement, every time you have to do any type of monetary payout as a result of a relationship that you've been with them, you're transferring wealth into their community. So by way of interracial dating, you can already say 100%, not only by interracial dating, but also by the sports arena, the music industry, and every other industry that Black people contribute to, in which they make significantly less money than their handlers. They don't put money back into their community. They buy all of these white material things. You are funneling your wealth into their community. So again, that's why I say Black people are helping this. Black people have helped this. And this is something that needs to be pointed out, because if we don't know where we're failing, we can't stop doing it. This is where Black people are contributing to it. So who are you going to complain to if you're not going to check what you're doing first? It says the typical Black family had zero wealth in 1968. Today, the median net worth of white families, $171,000, is 10 times that of Black families. But then you have Black people sitting up here saying, it don't matter who you marry. Who cares? Love is love. Really? Well, your love for your oppressor is helping you to continue to be oppressed. So keep on keeping on. The wealth Black families have accumulated is negligible when it comes to the amount of money needed to meet basic needs during retirement, pay for children's college education, put a down payment on a house, or cope with the jobless or medical crisis, Schmidt said. The lack of economic progress is especially startling, given that Black educational attainment have improved significantly in the 5 decades, Schmidt said. African Americans are almost as likely as whites to have completed high school. In 1968, 54% of Blacks graduated from high school, compared with 75% of whites. Today, more than 90% of African Americans have a high school diploma, 3.3% points shy of the high school completion rate for whites. The share of young African Americans with a college degree has more than doubled to 23% since 1968, although Blacks are still have as likely as whites to have completed college. Now, what this tells you is that education isn't the issue, voting isn't the issue, Black laziness isn't the issue, systemic racism and white supremacy, Black people, interracial dating, funneling their money into the system, being the biggest consumer, being the greatest asset to white supremacy, not owning their talent, not owning their athleticism, not owning their musical ability, and not having any vested interest in their community, coupled with funneling money into the white community by way of interracial unions, is causing these things. Not education, not voting, because you already have the education. It says the share of African Americans with a college degree has more than doubled to 23% since 1968, although blacks are still half as likely as whites to have completed college. And what's driving that is black men, because black women are actually more likely to be in college than white women. Yet the hourly wage of a typical black worker grew by just 0.6% a year since 1968. African Americans make 82.5 cents to every dollar earned by a typical white worker, the report said, and the typical black household earns 61.6% of the annual income of white household, with black college graduates continuing to make less than white college graduates. So again, you can throw education out the window. That's not the problem. Despite the poverty rate dropping from more than a third of black households in 1968 to about a fifth of black households, African Americans are 2.5 times as likely to be in poverty than whites. We would have expected to see much more of a narrowing of the gap given the big increase in educational attainment among African Americans. I wouldn't, because their lack of education has nothing to do with systemic white supremacy. A book, Healing Our Divided Society, to be released Tuesday at a DC forum, also examines how little progress has been made in the past 50 years. Because again, black people are not seeking progress. They're not. The proof is in the pudding. If you are seeking progress, you will be doing whatever it took to get it. Black people are not seeking that. They're seeking white acceptance, and they're not getting that either. But let's continue. Housing and schools have become resegregated, locking too many African Americans into slums and their children into inferior schools. White supremacists have become emboldened, and there is too much excessive use of force, often deadly, by police, especially against African Americans, notes the books, co-edited by Fred Harris, a former U.S. Senator and sole surviving member of the Kerner Commission. Whereas the Kerner Commission called for massive and sustained investment in economic, employment, and education initiatives over the last 50 years, America has pursued massive and sustained incarceration framed as law and order, the book says. Mass incarceration has become a kind of housing policy for the poor. The 1968 Kerner Commission report ended on a note of deja vu, citing a witness who recalled similar analysis, recommendations, and ultimately inaction following a government investigation nearly 50 years earlier after the 1919 Chicago riot. The destruction and bitterness of racial disorder, the harsh polemics of black revolt and white repression have been seen and heard before in this country, the report concluded. So the bottom line of it is nothing has changed. And we've been saying nothing has changed, because they could throw a number of different categories in there too, except they would have to say that they have changed because interracial dating has skyrocketed. And people want to send, and then black people debate whether they're smart or not. There's a debate whether they're smart or not, but you haven't had progression in 50 years. You've had zero progression in 50 years, and black people think that they are smart. They would actually sit here and argue whether they're smarter than white people. White people have had progression, and they've had progression because black people have helped them to have progression in terms of maintaining their place as dominant in the society and upholding white supremacy. So how is it that black people believe that they can make an argument for their own level of intelligence exceeding that of the white people who they are dominated by? And why isn't black people's intelligence giving them the understanding that they need to stop aiding in their oppression in order for it to go away? So no, like, really, I don't understand why there's an argument over that. That just tells how emotional and ego-driven we are, to the degree that we will ignore the reality of our situation just to try and sit here and act like we've accomplished something when we haven't. Let me know what you guys think. Thank you for your support, and I'll see you in the next video.